Full cast of characters here for the next 20-30 minutes to talk about everything going around the Oilers and Oilers Nation. And I'll be honest, right now there is not a lot going on around the Oilers. Always a lot going on at Oilers Nation because we got the McCentry shirt out. We got our playoff packages. We got meetings coming up with all of us talking about how we're going to crush it in the playoffs. But in terms of the on-ice product, I really don't care what's going on right now. And I just kind of wanted to send it around the horn quickly here and see if there's anything any of you are watching in these next two matinee games to close out the regular season. Josh, anything you're looking for in these games, or do you just want to get them over with?
Well, first of all, I should say last night was the first Edmonton Oilers game that I have placed a wager on in like 2.5 months. And I bet on the Oilers money line and I won. So I'm very happy, very pleased with that. We're trending in the right direction come playoff time because you guys already know we are betting heavy when the Oilers make the playoffs here, or when the playoffs start. But anyways, over the next two games, all I'm really watching is I'll be watching Tyson Barrie for sure. I'll be watching that second line to hope that they get trending in the right direction. You know, we saw some good stuff from them last night. We saw a 5-on-5 goal from Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. You know, miracles do happen every once in a while, but other than that, I'm just enjoying these last two games and just getting ready for playoffs. So yeah, it'll be good.
I suppose watching to see how like the depth scores get going, like can Yamamoto and Nugent Hopkins really get the production up is one thing to keep an eye on. Zach, what are you looking for?
I'm just looking for everybody to stay healthy. I mean, I think that's the biggest concern here in the final two games of the year, knock on wood. You know, let's just hope that everybody can stay healthy here and get through these last couple of games. And, you know, they'll have 4 or 5 days off after next Saturday here against Vancouver. And then we're playing hockey that really matters.
And that's sort of why I'm watching these with like one eye opened and kind of winced, because like I really feel only bad shit can happen in the next two games, and that just scares the hell out of me as an Oilers fan.
Why would you say that?
Well, because I have no effect on what's actually going to happen, but like that's what worries me, is that like really only bad shit can happen. Dan, anything you're watching for, or just hoping everyone stays healthy?
For me, it's the goaltending. It's seeing that this team more and more is becoming dependent on where Mike Smith will take us. And that's a little scary to me, just from the last bubble. So we saw it last night. The thing that I think a few of us have been asking for, I certainly asked for on Owen Radio on last Friday, is a full night off for Mike Smith.
Got it.
Backing up of Alex Stalock. And I'm hoping a game for Alex Stalock.
Really?
To at least give us an indication as to where he is as a goalie. Because we all know it, 2006 happened, and you know, Rolison went down with his injury. Conklin came in, immediately blew that game, and so then you went to your third stringer in UC Markkanen. I don't want to ever get to that point, but I think it's important that we know who we have on this team when it comes to game situations. I do believe that the Oilers know what Alex Stalock is, and that's probably why we haven't seen much of him. But I really want to see both Koskinen and Stalock get a start here at the end to make sure that they're both happy and feeling it, unlike Koskinen has in the last two starts.
Do you want to see both Koskinen and Stalock get the final two games? Let us know. We're live on Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well. So hop in the comments here. Give us your take. Here's my argument against that, Dan. If you have to go to Alex Stalock in the playoffs, you are already massively fucked. Like, that means one of Smith or Koskinen is hurt and the other one is playing so bad that you need to go to your third string. So I put more of an emphasis in these final two games of, one, making sure Mike Smith is rested, but also ready to go. And I think you can do that by playing him on Wednesday, because if you don't play him Wednesday and the playoffs don't start until the following Wednesday, we're going, 11 days without game action for Mike Smith? I don't love the idea of that. I start Mike Smith tomorrow and I go Koskinen on Saturday, because again, if you have to use Koskinen at some point in the playoffs, I want it to be into a situation where he's not coming in on like 4 weeks without having a game, right? Give him the last game, let him take to the crease, get his reps in. And for me, Stalock is just kind of like, he's there in case you need him, right? He's like a spare tire. I don't change the tires on my car just to get the spare some action. Like if I need to use that, I'm already pretty screwed.
That's a great analogy. That's actually a really good analogy.
I can see my car from my window. That's how I came up with it.
That kind of caught me off guard there. That was the lead.
Oh God. I think Dan makes an interesting point though. I think, you know, we've had Alex Stalock here on the roster for the last 2 months, And we don't know what the hell Alex Stalock is, right? We saw what he was able to do in Minnesota, and ever since then, he's been a giant question mark, right? Obviously, he's had a lot of health concerns. He had a really hard battle with COVID. I think, if anything, you play him tomorrow night against Montreal to reward him, to give him a chance to show what he's worth and show what he's worth to this organization, moving forward. Because we got to remember, Stalock is under contract through next year. Right, and Stalock is a guy who could very well just be, expansion bait for Seattle. Maybe they take him. Who knows, right? But at the end of the day, I think you have to at some point see what Stalock is for this organization, and the only way you can truly do that is in a game situation. So if I'm the Edmonton Oilers, I'd be starting Stalock tomorrow afternoon, and then I would give Mike Smith a start on Saturday. That way you get him and his legs ready to go for the playoffs, and you get a good chance to see what you got in the guy list.
Josh, what would you do?
In regards to the goaltending?
Yeah, how'd you do it the last two games here?
I don't really care about getting Alex Stalock a start. I'm starting Koskinen in one of the games, so I'm starting Smith in the other game. I don't want Smith resting that much. It's already going to be a 5 or 6 day gap between the final game of the season and when the Oilers start their playoff series. So I don't want Smith sitting that long. One thing that we've seen out of him is that, he does have good bounce back games, but he also is better when he's in a good rhythm. So I don't want Smith sitting that long. Koskinen, I don't really freaking care. I sure hope he doesn't have to start a single playoff game for us. But yeah, I don't really care that much about getting Stalock in a game, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, Zach, especially the long-term outlook here. He's under contract next year at $700,000. If you think he can be a competent NHL backup, that really changes your situation going into the summer here, which we'll talk about in just a second here. But I'm not sure, does a nothing game against the Habs or Canucks, would it change your mindset on Stalock? I still feel like even if you gave him one start, it would probably be a big gamble going into next season.
Yeah, I think so, but it's a gamble. I think you kind of have to see what you got, right? Because you got this asset in your organization, and you need to see what he is, right? And of course, there's the goaltending situation heading into the offseason. Notwithstanding anything that happens here over the next however long playoff run the Oilers go on, the goaltending situation is the biggest question mark on this roster moving forward, right? You got Mike Smith's a UFA. Mikko Koskinen has looked pretty solid for the most part all year, but he's very inconsistent. And then, hey, the Oilers just signed Ilya Samsonov to a 2-year entry-level contract, right? So what's the plan for him? You have to imagine he's coming over to play in the NHL and not down in the American League, given his pass in the KHL already, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
I think they might be planning for 1 year in the A with Samsonov. Or sorry, Konovalov. Did I call him? Yeah, I called him Samsonov. Konovalov. That's an interesting one too. Just heading over to the Twitch chat quickly. EJJS_Eli. Man, these names are not easy to say. Says he agrees with Zach and Dan. Says Stalock tomorrow is a smart play. Dangerous Wade is in as well. Says even split the game with Koskinen and Stalock. Dude had COVID. Look how long it took Neil to recover and adjust. Be good to see where he is at health-wise, which I kind of get as well. There's nothing quite like the game rep, right? And you're hoping the taxi squad's being pushed and all that, but makes sense.
Well, and the other thing too is that these last few games have been the showcase for Koskinen, right? It's this is what happens if Smith does go down. Koskinen has been absolutely horrendous. He's been fighting the puck for 98% of those games, and in spite of an Oilers team that's pretty damn good right now in front of him, they were able to win that game last night, but the one before that, not so much. So it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things that I think that Koskinen has kind of forced their hand to show what Stalock has, so that maybe Stalock is a starter at some point in this playoff run if Smith falters instead of Koskinen, who is your backup at this point right now. So
we're going to keep talking about the goaltending. If you're on Twitch or Twitter, I got the chats open right now. Give us your take on the goaltending, or give us your take on the topic we're going to end today's show on, which is Jack Eichel. Send us the package you would want the Oilers to give up for Jack Eichel, or if you don't want him at all, just tell us that. On the topic of goaltending, though, it is going to be an interesting summer, because how do you not have the conversation about bringing back Mike Smith at this point? I wouldn't be happy if it was Smith and Koskinen. I think you need to get a more established number one in here who can maybe carry things for 2 or 3 years. But Zach, what do you think about the idea of bringing back Smith? Is it a non-starter, or if you get him back for $1.5 million, are you doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger question kind of comes down to what's going to happen with Koskinen, and I think that's going to force the hand a little bit more, right? I think Edmonton needs to try and find a way out of Koskinen. I think Seattle's a great suitor there. He's a guy who goes to Seattle and start 40 or 50 games for him next year as an expansion franchise. And I think if it's Ilya Samsonov and Mike Smith, then hell yeah, I'm bringing back Mike Smith. If it's a reasonable deal, a year, million and a half, we saw what he was able to do this year. Even last year, he was still a pretty solid goaltender for the most part for the Oilers. So if he comes out here and helps the Oilers on a good run in the playoffs, and he chooses to come back into the NHL and not step away and retire, I think very much I'd be interested in bringing him back.
The playoffs would be interesting. Okay, are you saying Ilya Samsonov? Do you mean Konovalov?
I was just going to say Konovalov.
Oh my God, yeah.
I made that mistake too.
Jesus.
If they can get Ilya Samsonov, I'm happy. But Konovalov is the prospect.
See, I was thinking about the other. Samsonov is another one of those guys who came from the KHL and came over as a starter. So, yeah, Konovalov is who we're talking about here.
It's just another gift from Peter Chiarelli with this term for Koskinen that he signed mid-season. We can't forget that kind of stuff when it comes to what Ken Holland has to do to try and fix this lineup. For me, with Mike Smith, the only team that's going to give him a contract at this point is the Edmonton Oilers, and that's just because we trust him. I think if you let him go to open market, there might be a team that brings him in as their backup goalie.
Probably not a contender, though.
But not a contender, exactly. And so for me, it's like that has to tell you something. The market has to tell you something. And as much as we appreciate everything Mike Smith has done here, I think that wherever we end off in the playoffs will be a great send-off for Mike Smith from his career and from his career with the Edmonton Oilers, I hope. And then going forward, as you guys mentioned, the deal is you have to try and move Koskinen around because there's that albatross in the room where he's kind of blocking the goalie development or the ability for you to go out and get a goalie that can be your number one, because this team needs that.
Yeah.
This team needs some solidified number one goalie potential.
Mistaken Mexican in the chat, Drieger or Allmark were the two names he brought up. And those are interesting, but Drieger's not quite proven enough for my liking, and Allmark's been in Buffalo, where I don't know if I want to touch much of anything coming out of the Sabres right now. Just quickly before I get your take on it, Josh, the Koskinen buyout, if they were to go that route this offseason, he would go from a $4 million cap hit. He has one more year at $4 million. If they bought him out this June, it would be $1.5 million next year and an extra $1.5 million the year after. So the buyout, that courtesy of Puckpedia, is actually pretty appetizing. What would you do with the goaltending, Josh? Bringing back Smith no matter what? Buying out Mikko? What's the plan?
I think that's the biggest question mark surrounding the Oilers goaltending is what you're going to do with Mikko Koskinen. You have a couple of different options. If you can somehow find a trade suitor in which, you're going to be retaining salary and then also sending an asset the other way, and you can get him off the books essentially completely with the exception of the money that you're having to retain, then yes, that would be an option as well. But, ideally, Mikko Koskinen is not part of your starting two goaltenders next year. And yes, buying him out would be maybe a potential option, but also having 1.5 dead on the book isn't really ideal. So I think it really comes down to Mikko Koskinen and what you're going to do with him. If you could bring back Mike Smith next season as your backup goalie or your 1B, then that's a great scenario. I still think the Edmonton Oilers this offseason, they need to make a splash and bring in a goaltender that can be a legitimate number one starter, whether it's somehow in some way, getting John Gibson out of Anaheim, or whether it's one of those two goalies that they have in Columbus, getting one of them. I still think the Oilers need another goalie, and Mikko Koskinen is not the solution there. So if it was up to me, I don't like dead money on the book, but I'd probably buy Koskinen out. I don't know. You're not going to find a trade suitor. So
yeah, he's at 4.5. So if you were to retain half of it in a deal, it's 2.25 next season, which at that point, I wonder if the buyout is just more appetizing. Zach, do you hate the idea of buying out Koskinen, or is that a realistic play?
No, I don't hate it at all. I mean, I think it is fairly realistic. And at the end of the day, I'll come back to what I said before. Seattle's going to need a goaltender next year. So, Koskinen's going to be, 1 year, $4.5 million for them. And then they can continue to look. And I don't know what the outlook looks like for them and goalies. So, Without having done a bunch of research into that, that's probably my number one option. Again, I don't like buying guys out either. I'm not a big fan of it. I think we've seen it kind of bite the Oilers in the back end a little bit here over the last number of years. So I'm looking for a trade ideally.
The only thing that worries me is that there's probably going to be a lot of options out there for Seattle in the expansion draft. Like Colorado has both Francouz and Grubauer. Arizona has Adin Hill and Darcy Kemper. And you can kind of go down the list and see all these spots where like teams do have two goalies. Like Minnesota, what are they going to do? Kaapo Kähkönen and Cam Talbot. One of those guys can be scooped up by Seattle as well. So it might be a situation where you can throw in an asset to get Seattle to take Koskinen, or maybe you can somehow hit the grand slam home run of bite the bullet, buy out Koskinen, use that asset, get James Neal off your books, which would be interesting as well. Because if you look at the cap situation coming up this summer, if you can get rid of both Koskinen and Neal, holy shit, Ken Holland could do some damage this summer with that amount of money. It's at the point where you're talking about bringing back Nuge, getting a number one goalie, and still having more than enough money to go out and get a scoring left winger as well. This summer is going to be just fascinating from an Oilers perspective. There's so much they can do.
Of note there too, Tyler, Grubauer is a free agent this offseason.
He is. So Colorado might do a backdoor deal with him, right?
Yeah. Or he comes and plays with his fellow countryman in Leon Draisaitl.
But the rule is the Oilers have to keep Cahoon around as well. Grubauer says, I'm in, but show me the Cahoon extension before I sign. It'll be interesting. Looking here, Brad or Spanky Egg, if Holland gets rid of Koski in the offseason, he should get 2 places in the Hall of Fame. If he gets rid of Koskinen and Neal, he gets elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame a second time. I don't hate that idea. I don't hate that idea either. The one big story that's going to be, this is going to be a story around the entire NHL this offseason is Jack Eichel. He's pissed. He is not a happy boy right now with the Buffalo Sabres. Elliot Friedman talked about it in his 31 Thoughts. And actually, if you head to dailyfaceoff.com, Zach Lang has a good article, and it sums up the entire Jack Eichel situation very, very nicely. Zach, let's start there. Just take us through what's happening with Eichel, why he's pissed, what's going on, what's being said.
So basically what we have here is Jack Eichel suffered some kind of a neck injury, and it's believed that he needs surgery on his neck to repair some discs. So Jack Eichel said yesterday that he's been a bit upset about the way things have handled, and he's essentially said that he doesn't know where he's going to be playing hockey next year, leading everybody to begin speculation about a Jack Eichel trade. So he's considering an innovative new type of surgery that would see an artificial disc placed in his neck. Traditionally, the surgery, what it looks like is that disc would get removed, then the 2 vertebrae would be fused together in the neck. For a guy like Jack Eichel, though, that's going to limit his movement seriously and potentially, have major impacts on his career. So Buffalo, meanwhile, is kind of saying, well, hey, we're a little bit hesitant about that. We don't know what this type of a surgery is. It's still fairly new, but it has been approved by the FDA. So it sounds like Jack Eichel might be on the outs in Buffalo. And, if there's one thing we know about, relationships between teams and players, the financials, those are things that can get mediated over, right? Those things can get worked on. When it comes to the health of a player, and a player not being happy with the way he feels like he's being used by the organization, that's a whole other story. To me, reading between the lines of everything, it sounds like Jack Eichel is going to be the top trade target for a number of NHL teams this summer.
Going to be probably one of the bigger trades in NHL history when you think back through like Joe Thornton getting dealt. Rick Nash, when he was eventually dealt, was older than this, but like young players who are as good as Eichel in their prime, they get moved like once every 10 years, and that's what's going to make this so substantial. I think LA, I think Anaheim, New York, they're all going to be pretty heavily considering this, and I know Friedman listed off a bunch of names today in 31 Thoughts as well. Should the Oilers be interested? Because whenever anyone's on the market, we need to talk about if the Oilers should be interested. I'm saying no. It's going to cost you way too much. You're not at a spot where you need another $10.5 million player. You need to surround your 2 current expensive superstar forwards with more talent. I'm not sure if I would pull the trigger on an Eichel deal. I don't think the Oilers have the horses. Dan?
I think you would do it if Eichel filled checked another box other than, like you said, those other two forwards do.
Yeah.
If Eichel was Chris Pronger on defense, yeah, absolutely. Throw the farm at him. Let's get him in here, help this team out. If Rasmus Dahlin became available, that's a different conversation. But yeah, for me, it's shocking at a level of like Edmonton Surrey kind of frustrations where, like, how does a player not have more voice about his own future in these situations? It's so confusing to me when it comes out in the wash afterwards, and I'm sure we will see more come out once he does end up leaving Buffalo, or maybe at the end of his career. But yeah, you're right, Tyler. You hit it right on the head. If this was anybody but a forward, Oilers go after him. But it just doesn't check any boxes for us at this moment. There's no need to panic, and we can go ahead and make some other moves with this roster that'll be far better suited to this team.
Mistaken Mexican says, trade deadline, they wanted 4 pieces of top players and first-round picks. That's too much. Like, you'd probably be looking at 2 first-round picks. If you're the Oilers, it's probably like Holloway and Bouchard as well. Like, we're talking about a king's ransom here. Josh, you're shaking your head. You're not doing anything either?
Like, as a fan, yeah, it'd be freaking sick to have Jack Eichel with Connor McDavid. Like, that, you'd have 3 of the best forwards in the NHL. And yeah, it would be electric every night watching them play together. But like, that's just not a piece you need on this team. Like, $10 million in the amount and the quality of assets you're gonna have to send in the other direction. I just don't know if that'd be the play. Taylor Hall, on the other hand, whoo.
I think he's staying in Boston. Did you see that overtime goal he scored last night?
It's unreal. So good
on our broadcast.
Yeah. Just back quickly to Eichel. I have a funny feeling the Sabres might do the whole, we're not trading him in our conference, he's going out west. I think the LA Kings are the likely spot here. They can give up whether it's Turcotte or Byfield as part of the deal, which is a huge thing. Like, the Sabres could be getting back a good young, potentially franchise centerman. You make the picks work. Eichel in LA, Hollywood, that American-born player, superstar, like, everything makes sense with him going to LA in a market like that. Zach, any team that you think really stands out that can put together a good package here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple teams like LA, as you mentioned. I think the New York Rangers are a team that's had a lot of interest in Jack Eichel in the past. There could be even a couple of Canadian teams. I could see Ottawa and Montreal looking for somebody like that. A team like Columbus, who could be a real sleeper. Now, Columbus, I don't think has the assets to pull it off. But I think there's a number of teams that are interested. And as Friedman noted this morning, 2 and 31 Thoughts, he expects there to be teams that nobody would expect to get involved. So, who knows what that means? Maybe something crazy. We see something crazy happen and he ends up in Tampa, Florida, or who knows, right? In terms of the Oilers, would it be interesting? Yeah, absolutely. But I just, as we were sitting here talking, I played through it and what it would look like a potential deal for the Oilers on Puckpedia. We're looking at having to move a guy like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in a deal like this solely for the salary cap purposes. On top of that, you'd ideally like to move a guy like James Neal, who's got some salary left. And then that's not even talking about what's likely to be multiple first-round picks and guys like Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. So, I just don't see it being something that I think it's more of an NHL 21 trade than it is a real-life NHL trade. I
like that line there. One team to keep an eye on. Last Friday on the DFO Rundown, Gregor and Saravalli talked with Stan Bowman, and he mentioned, I'm paraphrasing here, but he kind of said something along the lines of, we're going to put ourselves in a position where if a really good player comes on the market, we can make a move for them. And I sit there and I look at that team. I don't know if they'd want to give up Kirby Dach, but Kirby Dach's only 5 years younger, or is 5 years younger than Jack Eichel. He's an established NHLer. If you were to go Dach and a couple of first-round picks, and then on the blue line, they got Boquist and Ian Mitchell, who both look really, really good for being both under 23, Chicago might be able to put together a package. And how well would that go over in that market? I mean, around the league, it'd be a sick story of Eichel and Kane pairing up for the last few years of Kane's career. I think Chicago might be one of those teams Friedman was just referencing a little bit. Like Bowman talked about maybe making big moves when they have the flexibility and all that. They have a ton of cap space coming up as well. Chicago, Eichel, Kane. I could see it.
That would be so sick. That would be so sick.
I really hope he stays in the Eastern Conference, though, from an Oilers perspective. Like, I brought up LA, and, like, the Oilers have a chance over these next 3 years to just dummy the division they're in. Vancouver, who knows what's going on there. Calgary looks like they're just a shell of what they were a couple of years ago. Anaheim's on the build. San Jose's doing whatever San Jose's doing. The expansion Kraken, who knows how good they'll be. Edmonton has a chance to dominate this division, and I don't want any of these teams stepping up and changing their rebuild quickly. Take your time. Take 4 or 5 years. Yep. We're good. We're good.
Flames again, Michael.
Shout out to all the haters of the Canadian North Division and thinking that McDavid victimized the North Division when he gets to play this fucking Pacific Division for a couple years and is just going to absolutely destroy those teams too. So, yeah, it's you're right, Tyler. I don't want to see the Flames get it. Yeah. I don't know. Like there'd be a bunch of pieces coming from Calgary to Buffalo. It would be a king's ransom, I think, but does it make the Flames instantly better to get one good player on their team?
Eichel's that good though. Like I think
he's so good.
I think sometimes the drama sort of clouds how talented Eichel is. Like he's had not a lot there, and he's still been coming like top 10 in scoring the last couple of years. In the Twitter chat, DangleDump94, don't bother with Eichel. If we go for anyone, it's Sam Reinhart. I like that name as a potential trade target for the Oilers. Left winger, can score goals, RFA, can get the deal done however you want it. Anyone else agree with me? Sam Reinhart, that's the fit. That's a move I make.
Yeah, I mean, Samson Reinhart would be a solid winger in the top 6 for the Oilers here. Like, you know what? Look what he did this year. He scored, 25 goals on 10, yeah. The friggin' Buffalo Sabres. Like, come on, man. You know, this is a guy who's a real strong NHL player. And, you know, he's from that draft class alongside Leon Draisaitl, right? And I think that would be a really good fit because he's another one of these guys, you know, like Eichel that said the other day, like, I don't really know what my future looks like, and, you know, paraphrasing obviously, but I don't know what it looks like, and I don't know if I want to be in Buffalo. So that could be a really interesting storyline to watch.
Yeah, Sam Reinhart seems like one of those guys. Obviously, he's an RFA coming up at the end of the season here, so you'd have to trade for him and then re-sign him. But yeah. I think that he could be one of those guys that if you did get your hands on him and you signed him to a team-friendly deal, he could be one of the pillar pieces of this team coming up in the next 4 to 5 years. And I think that the Oilers are one of those players away from really being able to look at this top 9, top 12 forward unit and be like, yeah, like this is a group that can really compete year in and year out. Like, yeah, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins would be that with Draisaitl and McDavid, but you know, who knows what's going to happen with the Nugent-Hopkins contract situation. But then even on top of that, if they did re-sign him, I still think that you're one of those forwards away. Could Jesse Puljujarvi become that? Sure. Kyler Yamamoto? Yeah, maybe. But I think that you're one player even above that level away from this being a really strong top 12.
It's a bigger package, though. Griffin Reinhart or Sam Reinhart?
Similar. The rate of Reinhart has stayed consistent over the last 2 years. 2 picks. Gets them for you. Reinhart, McDavid, Puljujarvi, Nuge, Draisaitl, Yamamoto, McLeod, Holloway, Cassian. That's a hell of a top 9 for next year. Sign me up for that.
Yeah, I'm all in.
All right, we're going to wrap this thing up. A couple of mean-nothing games for the Edmonton Oilers coming down the stretch here. But next Wednesday, that means 1 week from today, it'll be I just threw my pen. It'll be the State of the Nation playoff preview. Boys, I will talk to you then.
Cheers, love.